Right before the Joplin tornado in May 2011, May 22nd, 2011, you had some experience with tornadoes just before in Alabama, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. When I lived in Birmingham at the time, and there was, I think, as I recall, about 60 tornadoes across the state in one kind of supercell of a bunch of different storms, all small scale, but they did some damage. I wasn't in them, but like my neighborhood had some trees knocked over and that sort of thing. And then a few weeks later is when we went to Joplin with the one giant tornado.
Yeah. So let's come to that day then. So Joplin is where you're from, right? That's where you grew up
Right.
in Joplin. Um, so as the news is coming on, through the day, in the morning, we're expecting storms, and then the afternoon comes on and it's looking, a little more intense. And word is going out of possible tornadoes. First of all, are you even aware of this on May 22nd? And if so, are you putting it into the category of what you had just recently experienced in Alabama that, okay, I've seen this before? Or so, did this experience in Alabama just before going home to Joplin, did that figure in at all to your own early responses to news of a storm that might be coming?
As I recall, I was largely ignorant of what was coming. I mean, I remember we went to the graduation and then we came out, and my wife, she had a bunch of family in town. And so the plan was to go to her parents' house for some sort of reception or gathering. They lived at one end of town. My parents lived at the other end of town. And then this graduation was at the local university, kind of in north end of town. But the as we were leaving, that's when I think, I don't know, this is before like smartphones and stuff. I think we didn't may have heard it out on the radio. But I guess I don't remember. I might have had a smartphone, but I remember not knowing what was coming. And we heard that there was a tornado in the area, and then we were driving, and then I think I was driving, and my wife was kind of getting this information. They're like, no, it's right here, right now. And we took cover in a nearby movie theater, which is, we didn't get out of our car. Weren't in the tornado. We're kind of on the edge of it. On the edge of it, it was still light and a lot of hail, like big hail. And so I remember driving up under the edge of the movie theater, like up onto the sidewalk, and there was some sort of like overhang that we could get the car under, because I was afraid the hail was going to break glass or do some permanent damage. So we kind of rode it out there. Whereas her uncle had gotten further along towards our gathering spot and was actually caught in the tornado. And his rental car was destroyed, and branches through all the windows, all that kind of stuff. He and I think his wife was with him, and they were fortunately unharmed, but I mean, the car was totaled.
Did they remain inside the car?
I believe so. Like all the cell towers got taken out. So information, it took a long time to figure out what was going on, because the storm kind of cut across the whole length of town on the south end. We stayed on the north end, went to my parents' house because all the roads were closed. We had tried to go down after the tornado had kind of come through, but there was trees, there was traffic, and the roads were impassable. So we turned around, went to my parents' house, stayed there for several hours trying to figure out where everyone was and what the status was. I remember her parents, we got a hold of them eventually, and they were all right. And like her brother had graduated, and like you have all these high school kids running around town, and some of them were killed in the tornado. One of his good friends, I think, was sucked out of his car. And then we eventually heard like that her uncle was unharmed. He got there somehow. I think maybe her dad had gone and picked them both up. I don't know. I guess they probably like walked or something to get out of the damage zone to get to where you could actually drive, and that sort of thing. It was the next day, or maybe it was the day after. I don't know, a day or two later, that's when we kind of drove around, when they had the roads cleared enough you could kind of see what had happened. I remember kind of vividly because she wasn't living there at the time. She had moved a year or two before that, but my sister had been living in Joplin, and the house that she lived in that I used to go over to, I'd like mowed the yard, spent a lot of time there. So I knew the house, but when I got there, you couldn't recognize anything. There were no landmarks, no street signs, no trees, no houses. I mean, I eventually figured out her house because all that was left was the floorboards and the stairs to the basement. Like there was nothing left of the entire structure. So it took a while to even figure out where her house was. But when I saw that, it was, yeah, pretty surreal. And then cars and piles and everywhere. I didn't get out to like the hospital that got destroyed. And that was some of the most tragic stuff. But I do remember seeing the remains of my sister's house, and because she lived in the path of the storm, or had lived. She was not there at that time, but I mean, it's been 10 years and that section of town still looks vastly different because none of the trees have grown back.
Yeah. So there are just a few things I want to walk through, but let's pick up here. So you went out the morning after, and you described the destruction and how things are just leveled, homes completely gone. I mean, I just had the image in my mind of, the only thing sort of standing as a toilet screwed into the concrete, that sort of thing. I remember seeing that kind of thing. What do you remember seeing of people? Were people sort of
might have been
the rubble, or
it might have been 2 days. Like because I remember them telling everyone not to go out, because so that emergency vehicles and the paramedics, all them that were kind of like trying to find everyone and get through, that they wouldn't clog the roads. So it might have been, it was in the morning. And I remember because pretty soon we're headed back to Birmingham. So we were only there for a little while, which made it even weirder because we would see changes every once in a while when we come home to see family. But we kind of came into town, they had a tornado, and then a day or two later we were gone again. But wow. I don't remember seeing a whole lot of people. In fact, I remember being amazed at how empty everything looked.
Really? Wow. So people had cleared out. When you talk about you're at the theater and then you try to get under sort of an overhang at the theater, you drive up onto the sidewalk. Where was that in town? The one road that I know well by name is Range Line. I'm not very good with knowing road names. I go by landmarks. Where was the theater in town that you?
It was actually near the graduation, near this university. Sam and it is right off of Range Line. It's right next to the mall in Joplin. I'd actually worked at that movie theater all through high school and most of college.
And that's the state university there in the northern part?
Yeah, it's called Missouri Southern. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you were up there, and I mean, now given your experience in Alabama, even though you're right on the edge of the tornado, as it's happening, did you have a strong sense that this is a much bigger thing than what you had experienced in Alabama? You haven't seen anything yet, but do you have a sense that this is a much bigger thing?
Yeah, I mean, what happened in Alabama, like I said, I think like power was lost and we heard about it, but I didn't really see anything. I mean, I saw some kind of aftermath and was out with like chainsaw crews cutting up stuff, but I wasn't experience anything. Whereas the one in Joplin, we were actually on the edge of it and getting like damage. I mean, with the hail and that sort of thing. We didn't see like the funnel or anything. As I recall, it was the actual tornado was dark and there was so much debris. Nobody saw a whole lot of anything, which is often the case with those kind of storms. But because the sun was setting, I remember that it was really pretty sunset. Because this happened like 5, 6, something like that. It must have been around 6 or so. And it was starting to get dark, and then the storm made it really dark. But we could still see, and that's when the hail started falling. That's when we kind of pulled up under there. And I mean, I'm sure I had a strong sense of deja vu, but it was a while before I realized the extent of the devastation. Really not till we were kind of leaving town a day or two, a couple of days later, that we could kind of see how bad it was, instead of just kind of hearing that there was a lot of damage and people have been hurt and some people have been killed. Because I mean, it was the communication was pretty limited for quite a while afterwards, just because of how many towers got knocked out and how many people were trying to make phone calls and that kind of thing.
Wow. You said your uncle and his wife were in their car and the car was very battered. So they're in the car while the car is just being pummeled by debris, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, he showed us some pictures of the car afterwards. And I mean, yeah, there's like branches through the back window and all this stuff's like broken out. He's had come up from Austin, Texas for this graduation. So it was like a rental car. But I remember being like amazed and like we were all just like grateful to God that he had somehow had that level of damage, but had been physically unharmed. Just very, very shaken, he and his wife.
I saw a photograph just 2 days ago of a board that had basically gone right through concrete. So there was a concrete sidewalk, and this board had just pierced it, gone right through it. And so you've got the concrete still there with this board going right through it. It's mind-boggling, the damage. So
Yeah.
you're at the theater there. The storm passes. And then you make your way, so your meeting isn't going to have, your celebration isn't going to happen, I don't think.
Yeah,
And
no
so
one can get across town at this point because it was like a mile long. And so all the roads that go kind of north-south are blocked one way or another.
did you try to go south, but you got stopped by the
I
debris?
mean, that's kind of where we were headed south, and that's how we got derailed to the movie theater. And then after the storm had kind of passed, we tried to go again, then realized how much damage there was and that the roads were impassable. And that's when we kind of turned around and went to my parents' house, who lived on the north end of town.
What was the first thing you saw that made you realize that this is pretty significant?
I think when we got to kind of the edge of the path of the tornado and saw, I mean, obviously lots of lights, lots of emergency vehicles, lots of people around, and then just trees, branches, just debris everywhere in the road. And I mean, like there's no way to go anywhere. And then it's because, I mean, there's been tornadoes. I mean, growing up in the Midwest, even in Joplin, we'd had tornadoes in the past. As a kid, I remember them it taken out like a car lot or like just a few buildings here and there, but nothing on the scale of what happens then. They're always smaller and isolated. And not nearly as wide or on the ground as long. So it was kind of a slow realization that again continued until I left, and really continued until I had come back however many months later to see my family the next time, because then you could really drive around and see how much was gone. I mean, like the high school and the hospital, and I mean, blocks and blocks and blocks of just emptiness once they got all the rubble cleared out.
Wow. So you make your way to your parents' home then, is that right?
Right.
And so I'm assuming that the topic of conversation is the storm that had just passed through town or something like that. What do you remember about that? Sort of the human connections, the conversation, people in the immediate aftermath of something that they don't really have a major sense of yet because you haven't seen it, but you do have a sense that something significant has happened. What happens, how would you describe that interaction there at your parents' place right after the storm?
The next several hours was just trying to get through the phone system to try to connect with everyone. Because I mean, everyone has like cell phones and stuff at this point, but we're not like tracking each other with
Right.
apps, all the kind of stuff that we do now, where it's much easier to kind of keep track of things. And so if you
Right.
can't get a hold of someone on the phone, you don't really know where they are, if they're alive. So spent a lot of time. Like I said, we managed to get a hold of her parents, but it was quite a while after that we kind of got connected to the other family members that were in town for this graduation to make sure everyone was all right.
Yeah. And is that, was that one of the major questions on the table? We just want to find out if people we know are alive. And let me set it up this way, if there's a big storm somewhere, and someone else in the country knows you live in that state, they might call just to check if you're okay. They assume that you probably are, but they're just checking.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing this is a more intense thing. We actually really do want to know if certain people survived this thing. Was that how that went?
Yeah. And then, I mean, enormous frustration at the limitations of technology to find that out, because you can't drive across town because the roads are closed. You can't, so you're trying to call across town, but everyone's trying to call, and the network is so damaged that few calls are getting through for I don't know, several hours. It might have been the next day before we really were able to uh, have good communication again. So I remember the the stress of just the unknown.
Yeah. So for well over 100 people, I think the number that I see now is 161 in a small city of 50,000. That's a high number. And then, of course, you have a lot of people who are very seriously injured. So as we're wondering, did so-and-so make it? Did so-and-so get home and all of that? In some cases, the answer is going to be no.
One of my wife's younger brother, the one who graduated high school, one of his close friends had been killed, just pulled right out of his car, like he was driving like a Hummer or something, and killed. I'm not even sure. I think it took a while to find the body. That was kind of this jarring, traumatic thing that really, I mean, everyone that lived there was serious damage, like psychologically, a lot of PTSD. I mean, some people still are dealing with it. A lot of people moved away. I mean, people were in FEMA trailers for a year or two. I mean, it was rough. Like personally, after all of my immediate family was okay, I mean, it wasn't like that emotionally impacting ongoing, but every time I came home, it would kind of like sink in again what had actually happened and how close we were to possible death.
Yeah. When you're going to school in Alabama, and then you'd come home. When you came home after some time, of course, things look different. You can't help but to notice the tornado path. I think, as you've indicated, that's still true. You can still see, 11 years later, where the path went through. Did the town feel different at all after being away for a while? Did it feel that in some way the tornado had changed, for lack of a better phrase, the vibe of the town, the feel of the town? Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, initially, like I said, there was so much damage to the community. It took several years for that to kind of level out. I mean, as I recall, like my parents are still connected to a pretty big church that was connected to the college that they went to, which is also in Joplin. So, I mean, 50 years of kind of being deeply involved with the same set of people. And as a school I went, the elementary and high school was connected to this church. So I was also deeply rooted in this community all through my growing up years. And that church kind of took a big lead after this tornado, and like Obama came, and I mean, there was so much attention from the whole nation on, I mean, some tiny town in the Midwest that had previously not ever had any kind of attention. And so that definitely changed the vibe, changed the way everything felt, because suddenly everyone had heard of Joplin, Missouri, where previously, unless you lived in that tri-state area, no one knew much about it. And then eventually, after several years, there was like kind of a revitalization, and suddenly everything's being built in Joplin because of all the damage. I mean, all these houses, all these new businesses, and so that certainly changed the vibe because they were starting from scratch. And then, I mean, they rebuilt the hospital and the high school and many of the major landmarks that we all grew up with that had been there for generations. So especially if you lived in that part of town, I mean, it was unrecognizable.
Yeah. I think this might be the last question. You mentioned President Obama comes, and I remember listening to that speech. I think he came back on the 1-year anniversary as well, and he gave a speech then as well. FEMA comes, government agencies come. Then you mentioned the big church that your family's been linked to for a long time responds. Same is true of many other private institutions. So you have a lot of private institutions that respond. You have government agencies that respond. Now, I know you're not in Joplin. I mean, you're there in and out, but you're most of the time away from school or away from Joplin because you're in school. Do you have any sense at all of sort of how that went in terms of impact? Would you say that on the whole, the private initiatives had the greater impact, or the government initiatives had the greater impact, or they worked well together? Just what general thoughts do you have about the impact, this mix of private and public?
Yeah, like I certainly didn't have like a on the ground view of that, but I mean, most of my information was coming from my parents, who are kind of embedded in this community and have been since they were in college. But I think, I mean, just like after 9/11 and most tragic events, there's suddenly a vast outpouring of sympathy and unity, and everyone's trying to work together. And especially same in Arkansas, in the Midwest in general.
Yeah.
The emphasis is on private institutions, not government help. And Missouri is famously just wants to be left alone. And so I obviously you need agencies like FEMA, and you need massive amounts of money and that sort of thing in the wake of these massive disasters. But I think most people that had grown up in Joplin, and certainly like my family and people I knew, were not used to relying on these massive governmental institutions, or having them kind of intrude into their lives unless they were in pretty desperate situations. And so at that somehow now everyone's in a desperate situation, and that becomes needed. Now, I don't know how much like tension there was. I know the city, and they had a lot of people really stepped up, and a lot of people continue to really push, and it kind of sparked a revitalization that had maybe already been going on, but certainly got a big boost from this kind of community come together sort of feeling, that those that remain behind, they're now, I don't know, unified in a way that they weren't previously. The biggest sense was just surprise, just because, I mean, even after we had taken cover and had hail, like, okay, we had a storm, there was hail, there's this damage, big storm, and like and then they heard news, there might have been a tornado, it might have touched down, but the scale of devastation, it took a long time to sink in, because you said it was so quick. I mean, it was over, and then, but suddenly you see how much damage could be done so quickly.